All right, good afternoon. Buenas tardes. My name is Richard Perez, and I will be the moderator for this challenges panel facing renewable energy penetration in at-risk disasters-related areas. So we have very good speakers today who are going to raise the challenge that renewable power development poses for a place like Puerto Rico. Today is a challenge view, and you're welcome to sit on the panel tomorrow at the same time, where we'll tackle more the high penetration solution of what could be in the future if those challenges, short-term challenges, are overcome. So we had a call among the panelists a few weeks ago, and one word that came out of that call was the idea of transparency. It's good to know exactly the situation in many different dimensions to put the best solutions up. So our first panelist is Tria Case. She's the Executive Director of the Sustainability and Energy Conservation Group at CUNY, and she will tell us about where we can put the resource, how we can be transparent about where you can put it based on our experience in New York City. So Tria. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. All right, so again, my name is Tria Case. I'm the University Executive Director of Sustainability for the City University of New York. And about 2006, when I was first looking at New York City, I realized that New York City didn't really have a whole lot of solar. And when we first started talking to Con Edison at that time, there was a lot of nervousness about deploying distributed generation on the grid. And it took some time to think about how do we bring everybody together, how do we understand what the real issues are associated with distributed generation. And we thought at the time, even if there is solar on a rooftop, even if we are able to deploy, it's kind of hard to see it, particularly in a vertical scenario like New York City. And so we need to start thinking about how do we make it transparent. But we also need to think about what do we need to do in order to deploy. And so we spent a few years working on making New York City the first solar American city in the country. We started deploying solar, and sure enough, we had our own hurricane in New York City. And we had some successes, and folks called us after Hurricane Sandy and said, how'd solar do? And the good news was that solar stayed on rooftops. It did not fly off rooftops. We had some inverters that got flooded out. But the solar had to shut down, because when the grid shut down, solar had to shut down. And so it was a lesson for us in thinking about how and where do we deploy, but also, maybe we need to think about black start inverters. Maybe we need to think about battery storage. Maybe we need to think about how do we identify where does solar need to go, and how do we do this right, not just try to deploy solar wherever we can. And so the first thing we set out to do was to create a map. How do we make it transparent for people? Where is solar, but also what's the solar potential of your own building? It's kind of hard to think about what that is if you're not a solar developer. And so we created the NY Solar Map, nysolarmap.com for those of you that haven't seen it. And you can plug in any address across the city and actually across the state, and it'll take you to that rooftop and it'll tell you what the solar potential is for that roof. But also it wraps it with information about where do I find an installer, how do I go through the permitting process, maybe what is the information about the AHJ, the municipality that I sit in across the state, so that you're not only finding out what the solar potential is, but you're also finding out a little bit about what it's going to take to get solar on that rooftop. In order to build a solar marketplace, there's a whole lot that has to happen. You have to think about what the infrastructure is, what's the permitting and zoning, what can the grid take, where can it take it, what policies do we need in place in order to be able to incent solar, what kind of incentives really make sense. We were finding out at the time that solar was happening maybe in Westchester, but it wasn't happening in New York City. We needed to level that playing field. So New York City put in place a tax abatement, for example. You have to make sure that you're figuring out how you can put it on that roof. That's the solar map. You can figure out how you have to access it. Maybe there are things like group purchasing in order to bring down the price, and to educate folks about solar. And you have to bring people together like we are today to talk about what the opportunities are and where. We also have to think about that resiliency piece. Solar by itself is not resilient. We need to make it, we need to link it with black start inverters, we need to link it with battery storage if we want it to stay on when the grid goes down. And so really thinking about how we deploy solar and battery storage is something that we all want to think about when we're thinking about something like Puerto Rico or New York City, because we're all going to have these same problems. So at the end of the day, we were able to get LiDAR data, and that basically allows you to fly a plane over a particular area, shoot lasers down, and it creates a 3D image of a location. So we now have LiDAR data for New York City, Westchester, and Long Island. So the NY Solar Map will tell you what the solar potential is, thinking about the shading that is going to be provided by a building or a tree or anything else, so that you can really see what that potential is. In addition to that, thinking about how you map the critical facilities and that solar potential, so that you can then think about, where do I have a critical facility, a police station, a hospital, a school, where there is solar potential that I can really focus on. And by doing that, we're able to not only show, okay, so maybe there is solar on a school and we can show where that is today, but it allows us to do some planning. It allows us to think about, where do we have the solar potential and where does that overlay with a critical facility? And by mapping it, we can now bring all the right parties together who can help to make that happen. And I think that that's key. There's a whole lot happening in Puerto Rico today. There's solar that's being deployed. We just heard about some projects just at lunchtime today. But it's very hard to see where they all are and think about that in conjunction with what the potential is and to try to plan that out. And when the grid is ready for it, that's going to be the next step. In New York City, once we were able to bring Con Ed to the table to think about something like the solar map, and I'm a big believer in project-based change. If you can bring everybody to the table around a project and get them working together, it's amazing how quickly everybody can start to develop those relationships and you see the change happening. And so at the end of the day, you're able to map these things, you map those critical infrastructure, and you're able to get everybody developing those relationships, so when everyone's ready, you're able to deploy. And if you're able to put all the data out there, people can not only find out what their potential is, but they can get to the folks who can help them adopt. And so 2 things that we were able to do on the solar map is allow people to see the financial breakdown of what a solar installation will cost, but also bring them to the installers. And so any of the installers that, in our case, are NYSERDA-approved installers, they're able to be reached through the solar map, so that now you don't sort of at the end of the day, oh, I have potential, now what do I do? You can actually find out who is able to put the solar on your rooftops, and you can connect to them, and then ultimately you're able to find out and send to them the information so they can get back to you. So I had 5 minutes. I took a minute more than I should have. But I wanted to make sure you all understand that there's a way that we can not only get the information out there about what's up there, what's happening already, but what the potential is. And I think that's something that's very important that we could all work on together. Thank you.
Thank you, Treya. Next speaker is Tom Bourgeois, who's Deputy Director of the Place, Energy and Climate Center. And you're going to tell us about transparency in the regulatory world.
Regulations, etc.
And we'll have a lot of interaction afterwards. We'll bring all the speakers here and we can go for questions. Sorry, Tom.
So just page. There we go. Thank you very much, Richard. Thank you. I'm pleased to be here today to talk about this really interesting topic about university engagement. And I was thinking as I was listening to the keynote speaker, what do universities have to offer here? And I do think we have plenty. Let me tell you a little bit first about who we are. We are a not-for-profit project of the Pace University School of Law. We've been in business for 30 plus years. And in many ways, I think we're a unique institution. We're at the university, but except for our executive director, we're not funded by the university. The executive director does teach at the law school, but we're a project within the law school, soft funded. Over the years, I've done research work for all kinds of institutions, Oak Ridge National Labs, Department of Energy, a lot of NYSERDA work, and even some significant private sector work. We've worked on microgrid issues with companies large and small, Booz Allen, Fuel Cell Energy, Hitachi Microgrids, etc. But what we really do is we focus on the design and execution of subnational policy. We're not looking at international programs. We're not looking at the grand designs for at national level, international. We do a little bit of international work, but we really tend to focus in areas where decisions are made to really put in effect the policies, the grand visions that we hear about. So we get involved in energy rate cases, setting market rules and procedures. And I think that what's really valuable here is that this is where the work gets done. Energy markets, it's not at all like a commodity market. Energy markets are highly regulated. You're regulated at the state level with the Public Service Commission, Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, New York ISO, et cetera. You can't just put a product on the market and sell it. It's not like one of the analogies we used to use is it's not like selling shrink-wrapped software in a commodity market. Tria talked about the issues having to do with interconnection. When we first started years ago, interconnection was a huge issue. Tria also mentioned the fact that we had solar, but the solar, while it wasn't destroyed, it didn't operate. So what we would like to do is that we would like to translate these broad policies to actionable, effective policies, broad goals to effective policies. And what we have in Puerto Rico is we have a call for a market increase in aggressive investments in clean distributed resources, a real imperative to rebuild the whole system, generation, transmission, and distribution, and doing so while addressing multiple objectives, equitable access to clean energy, resilient energy, and also issues having to do with the development of economic development and jobs. So one of the areas that we feel the university, organizations like ourselves can offer some assistance here, and we do work a lot with community organizations. I don't want to lose sight of that. It would be the height of hubris to say that you can walk into Puerto Rico and understand everything and be the expert that tells them what to do. This is done in close collaboration with organizations on the ground. We do that in New York and in the Northeast. We work with community organizations. We work with environmental organizations. And what we believe needs to happen here is that we have to make distributed energy a dynamic asset that really serves the grid. Again, going back to what Tria mentioned, we had solar, but the solar didn't operate. It was designed to shut down. It was not a dynamic asset that was serving the grid. One way that it was put, that the utilities at one time had a so-called connect and forget mentality. We'll connect this and forget about it. We want this to be interactive. We want it to be useful. We want it to help improve the operation of the grid. When we're making these investments, we want to make sure that there are rules, markets, and structures that make and also create new value streams so that the owners of these assets can capitalize on the full value that that asset provides. to incorporate distributed energy to enhance system performance, productivity, reduce grid interruptions, and lower capital expenditure costs. So in general, what we're looking to do is we're looking to try to make the grid, as we develop new grid investment, make the grid more DER amenable. We have spent a little bit of time in Puerto Rico. We got a small amount of grant money to do some intervention in some of the in some of the proceedings. This has been our theme: make the grid more DER amenable. System planning models that really take account of customer-sited resources, and also transparent methods and communication systems for connecting distributed energy and really utilizing them to help the grid. So finally, recommendations for community engagement. I think we need, as I said, to really closely collaborate with key public interest stakeholders, translate community energy development needs into a concrete set of regulatory rules. This is a market that is one that's highly regulated. The market framework really sets the kind of investments that are made and the kind of energy system that's realized. If you don't have the rules right, you're not going to get the kind of energy system that you're looking for. And establish fair measurement and compensation systems. By that I mean pay resources for the value that they create for the grid. And just as importantly and finally, have planning and committee structures that are really inclusive, bringing in broad interests. These decisions tend to be made behind closed doors, with the utilities who have lawyers paid for by ratepayers, and then a few large interests. Most people don't have time or resources to pay attention to what's going on in rate cases, though this is the table at which the regulatory structure is being developed. So it's really important that we be in there. Universities can help support that effort and help incorporate best practices in transparency and good governance so that we can rapidly evolve to address changing markets. And I think I've used my 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tom. Our next speaker, Thomas King, Managing Partner at Cross River Capital and President and Founder of Fundación Borincana. And he will tell us, I hope, about the importance of revenue streams to make sure that everything works as planned. PDF, so it's a bit different, but I think it should.
That's all right. I sent the PowerPoint yesterday, but it didn't work that way.
Okay,
Okay.
but it does it as sorry, it's on directory.
That's all right. Hi, everyone. I'll set a stopwatch so I won't run over. Tom King, Fundación Borincana, and Cross River Capital. Okay, sort of advances. So about last year after the hurricane, I won't go into all the background because this really requires 20 minutes rather than 5. So let's say I started this last year to focus on guiding and accelerating the transformation of energy infrastructure in Puerto Rico for the benefit of its people and the people of the world. Let's just, I'll stipulate the fact I know what I'm talking about. And I've done this for a long time, investment banking around the world, all sorts of markets, billions of dollars, private equity, investment banking, community development, etc. So Puerto Rico, quick background, you've heard from a number of people. It has one of the most advanced energy policy laws in the world. It's got barriers that remain, or challenges are more market and economic development driven rather than policy or regulatory driven. You have a situation that's very different after the storms and the bankruptcy, where unlike here and everywhere else where the system is working, system doesn't work in Puerto Rico. It's broken down. So instead of the regulators, the politicians, the customers, and the utility holding up and saying, well, let's not break it, right? It's not broken, we don't need to fix it. It's just the opposite. And so people have created a vision to leapfrog, and it's a huge potential asset for Puerto Rico. Among other things, it is the sandbox where resilient infrastructure and processes and other things are going to be tested and proven over the next year and will eventually be a model for the world. Oh boy, so this is sort of in between, right? The problems, of course, is that you've got a market where financial markets are unproven, policy is incomplete, it's all kind of being proven as we go. You've got chronically underdeveloped financial markets, deficits in market sized and established practices, so even where you have things working, there isn't a normal pathway. We need to build these and create them. We've got no visibility into quality executable investment opportunities, right? So if you want expertise and capital things to come in, among other things, they need to be able to see a pipeline of things that they think they can execute, and we're not there yet. In fact, where we do see a couple of large-scale things going with the PPAs and others associated with the large grid-connected renewables, those have just got shut down again. So I can argue that maybe they shouldn't have been started up quite quickly enough until other things were in place to make them easier to do, but that's beside the point. External to Puerto Rico, you're seeing attitudes in the capital markets changing very slowly, but you ask the typical person, they're going to tell you that they think Puerto Rico is a banana republic. All the corruption, all you hear in the news, when frankly, Puerto Rico, though the system lends itself to corruption, it's frankly no corrupt in our federal government. And by the way, if you're keeping track of arrests, there have been can't pay, won't pay, too hard, no scale. These are typical things, no visibility. These are things we have to change to create momentum. We need to demonstrate basically enhanced credit profile. Things are not nearly as bad. I wouldn't recommend anybody try and do business with PREPA, with the government, but private to private, private to community, public to community, if you're talking about U.S. Department of Agriculture and other types of rural lenders, these are great opportunities. We need to build a lot of stuff in here. So sorry about the in-between. The Fundación Borincana, we recently received our 501c3 and also the largest grant ever from the USDA Rural Development for a Rural Business Development Grant Program. We're creating the Puerto Rico Energy Capital Access Program. We're going to be working with individuals and companies, community groups, municipalities on their energy projects. So basically coming at this at the bottom and helping people who really have no experience in raising, operating finance, presenting their ideas, their projects, putting them in a way, collecting them and presenting them to capital in a formatted, professional way, teaching them, giving them financial education and technical assistance to get them to the point where they can access capital, where they can be taken seriously by capital. And at the same time, when we build momentum, bringing these projects to capital providers to show them, hey, there are real things to do in Puerto Rico. There are good projects to do. This is what we're on about. I usually start conversations with, what can I do to help, or what can we do to help? And I like to end conversations with, what can you do to help us? I think there's a lot of things that we can do together. Cecilio and Marla and Lionel from INESI have been fantastic. We're looking to find ways to work. Within this program, we're actually going to be hiring a fellow from the university, at least one, in Puerto Rico. That application should come out in the next couple of weeks and spread it around. This is the contact number. I think I've got like one more slide, which I'm not going to get to, which I'm just going to say I'm doing a lot of work with cooperatives as well. Cooperatives can be the real difference maker. At the end of the day, it probably makes sense for there only to be 2 or 3 cooperatives, electric cooperatives throughout the whole island. We'll let that grow. They completely change the dynamic by allowing communities to create the counterparty credit structures and the investment pathways necessary to sustainably deploy and scale vast amounts of distributed generation and energy storage without permanent subsidy. The last bit is economic development. You can do this without, trying to replicate or scale all the massive amounts of impact and philanthropic money that's come and done the key things that have been done today. We need to change that dynamic. So thanks a lot. I've run over a bit, but we're good. Thanks.
thank you very much, and thank you to all speakers to keep time. That's great. So our next speaker is Dr. Chris Delia, Dean and Professor of College of Coast and the Environment at Louisiana State University. He was also my VP for research many years ago, like 15 years ago or so. So welcome back.
Well, I really appreciate the opportunity to be on this panel, a very thoughtful panel, because there are a lot of moving parts to moving from a traditional energy structure to a renewable one. So what are my major premises? The first and most important and obvious one to most of us here is that fossil fuels are a finite resource. And it really doesn't matter all the arguments about climate change and everything else. Eventually, we're going to have alternative energy sources. There's no way around it. Substantial growth in renewable energy production has occurred, but with increasing total demand globally, fossil fuels have provided and continue to provide a very large portion of our overall energy budget, something on the order of about 80%. And if you go back 30 years, it was about 80%. That's because the total demand for energy has grown, and renewables unfortunately have some drawbacks to them. The transportation sector is particularly vulnerable to the problem of switching to renewables. It's very dependent on liquid fuels. 80-something% of our transportation is supported by liquid fuels. Particularly important to me is the agricultural sector. And all of the energy we put into producing food is actually very remarkable. Somebody once calculated that 10 kilocalories from fossil energy are put in for every 1 kilocalorie of solar into the agricultural system. And that means that our agricultural system is extremely vulnerable, and liquid fuels are very important for that. Future energy development in Puerto Rico must be strategic and based on facts and realities, not politics. One thing about energy, there's a lot of politics, and we always have to realize there's a long road ahead of us with many obstacles and potholes in it. And then finally, one of my mantras is that we really need to worry more about energy education. People don't understand it very well. We need to always remember to keep some diversity in our energy sources. If we become over-reliant on one source, that increases our vulnerability. And for God's sakes, it's one thing we can really do quite easily is conserve energy where possible. I live in a state, Louisiana, where it seems like every other car is a F-150 being driven with, by one person with nothing in the back. In fact, it's kind of a major thing when you see a truck that actually has something in it. So what does our U.S. energy budget look like? We use just less than 100 quads of energy in this country. We have unfortunately not really gotten off the dime with renewable very far. It's only about 12 or 13%. Now this is 2 years ago. We actually don't have much of an energy deficit right now, if you believe the U.S. Energy Information Agency, and that's quite remarkable. The reason for that is very simply fracking. And fracking, which was a negligible part of our energy system back in 2005, is now a major contributor to it. And it really is amazing. What does Puerto Rican energy look like? Well, it's not very much. I mean, it's mainly electrical generation, and it is, the sources are shown there, primarily has been very traditional with just a little bit of a hydroelectric behind it. And so this is a really right market for the development of renewables, particularly solar and wind. But we got to keep in mind some very important concepts. And I teach a course on energy and environment. These are sort of the mantras that we have as we teach the course. One is I use the concept of energy return on energy investment, something that Charlie Hall, formerly of SUNY ESF, now retired, was a big proponent of. And that is that producing energy requires an energy investment. And you've got to get more energy out than you put into it to be successful. You got to worry about return on investment. No investor wants to invest in something that there's not a tangible return on. Traditionally speaking, these markets have not been very good in terms of return on investment, and they're highly subsidized by tax subsidies. We always want to think about life cycle analysis. It's not just what you're getting out of the electrical system when it's generating solar energy. What did you have to put into it? How much energy went into getting that silicon into a usable state? How much energy do you have to put into building the structures, the transmission, etc.? So that's a pretty important aspect. And then finally, total energy yield. The total net energy supplied by a given source is extremely important. Again, the fossil fuel sources have been very wonderful and robust sources of energy for us. Getting enough total energy out of renewables is proving to be quite challenging. Why? Solar is actually very diffuse. It would take a 1 square meter solar panel 30 days to produce the energy in 1 gallon of gasoline. And that's a pretty stark thing. It means the aerial requirements are large. If we look at the challenge of renewables, where every place I have an arrow, it's an indicator of low energy return on investment and total energy yield. And the renewables don't stack up very well in this case. Hydroelectric is great, wind is pretty good too, in terms of energy return on investment. Again, that's not a huge amount of total energy yield though. If you look at other things like biodiesel and other forms, I think the picture is very grim. And this is, again, this is from Charlie Hull and John Day. So the big picture take-home messages I have. We need to plan carefully and strategically with facts and not having politics drive our energy policy decisions. That's a tall order. There is a lot of disinformation and misinformation out there. I'm always amazed that when I get a new class in front of me, they seem to believe what they hear from politicians on both sides and the media more than they believe David Dismukes and I, who teach the course together, when we teach with facts. Energy return on investment, life cycle analysis, and total energy yield are very important considerations in evaluating our energy options, and we have to look at all of our energy development through this lens. Energy R&D is absolutely essential. Energy storage issue for electricity remains a major challenge. I think Trias mentioned the problem they had there. Incidentally, the reason why they turned that electrical off from solar is they don't want to electrocute anybody as they're putting everything back in. And finally, we must really worry about how we educate about energy. Most people are pretty illiterate. We've got to keep our energy sources diverse, and we've got to conserve energy where possible. Thank you.